right, Jessica.
All right.
Whew, thank you, Del. That was amazing. Definitely a tough one to follow. Okay. Whale, port side. My ninja-like, incredibly high-energy commanding officer snuck up behind me on USS Lassen's bridge to test my reaction to an imaginary ship-handling emergency. 5 feet 7 inches with blue eyes, freckles, reddish hair, and in perpetual motion. He was born somewhere in the middle of many Irish Catholic children and ate with his arm wrapped around his plate. An ingrained habit formed as a child due to his dad swooping in to snag his food. We never knew from what small space or overhead he might suddenly appear, and I was always on my toes, trying my hardest to be ready for his surprises. As a woman who started her Navy journey in 1995, I am not a glass ceiling breaker, but I have been gut by the glass left from those who went before me. By the time I arrived to USS Lassen as a commissioned officer in 2000, the Navy had made a lot of progress to accommodate women in the 6 years since the first woman was permanently assigned to a warship. I witnessed the ship being built from the ground up for both men and women in Pascagoula, Mississippi, a town I had never heard of, and as a native San Diegan, was confused as to how it could house a Navy ship without being next to the Pacific or Atlantic Ocean. Pascagoula was not where I thought I needed to be as a naval officer, but I got used to living in my first place where the tap water ran brown, and the locals were horribly offended when I failed to include the word super before Walmart. The competitor in me was focused on doing my best and ideally outperforming my peers, male or female. My commanding officer demanded as much from me as my male counterparts, which I recognized even as a brand new officer was a privilege. And in my college years as a midshipman, it was clear that Navy policy on women had changed, but procedures were still catching up. At my first year analysis, where I was so hydrated I thought I might wet myself, when I finally made it to the front of the line, I was greeted with the words, "Oh fuck, a female." This would certainly not be the last time I heard a similar phrase, especially during my years before USS Lassen, where I often found myself excluded as a woman, which was frustrating, or in a toxic environment, which was sometimes dangerous. Thanks to my mother, who was herself a glass ceiling breaker on the DC Metropolitan Police Department during the Nixon administration, I wasn't surprised by the exclusion and was well trained, if not paranoid, about keeping myself safe. When I got to my first ship and saw that my commanding officer cared more about my performance than my gender, I jumped in with 2 feet to complete the training requirements to become a qualified surface warfare officer. I put additional pressure on myself as one of the first women with the privilege to start her Navy career on a warship built from the ground up to accommodate females. As the final test of the qualification process, my captain grilled me with questions for hours. I wasn't sure how it was going. I knew a lot of the answers, but there were some questions where I hadn't simply forgotten the answer. I didn't even understand the question. After answering what felt like the millionth question, suddenly my captain leapt out of his chair, clapped his hands, rubbed them together, and declared, "Well, it's time for dinner." Off to the wardroom we went, my captain happily eating his meal, casually chatting with other officers, arm wrapped around his plate, mindlessly flicking lima beans that he had previously banned, but occasionally snuck into the meals as part of a standardized vegetable medley. I sat unable to eat a bite, wondering why he hadn't yet told me if I had passed his test, a test I knew would set the tone for the rest of my Navy career. A change from the day's published schedule, I heard over the announcing system, "The ship is in a training team environment. In case of an actual casualty, the phrase actual casualty will be passed." Next, the ship's bell clanged with a distinct, sharp, and resonant sound, first in rapid succession, then ending with 3 clear, high-pitched ding, ding, dings, indicating a fire in the aft end of the ship. Next, the sailor announced, Ensign Lipsker, Ensign Mackay, 3 Gen. The two of us jumped up from the dining table and hustled to get a couple hundred feet aft and 2 decks down, where the ship's 3rd electrical generator was located. You could hear the smile in the sailor's voice over the announcing system, which paired well with the glee on my captain's face as he watched me struggle to put on an entire firefighting ensemble, complete with oxygen mask and tank, chuckling when a sailor purposefully handed me a suit designed for someone a foot taller. Eventually, I heard the CO declare, "Fire's out of control, smoke is filling space, egress from the ship." The next thing I knew, a blindfold covered my eyes. Again, I heard my CO, "You'd better find your way out before the fire kills you." While I knew there wasn't an actual fire, I also knew the eyes of the entire crew were on me. I was terrified that if I didn't make it outside of the ship's walls, I would disappoint my captain, all of the shipmates who trained me, and most importantly, myself. I suppressed my tears, a skill I had mastered as a 5-year-old after my mom yanked me from the movie theater where I apparently cried too much during E.T. Luckily, I happened to be blindfolded near my rack, so I knew the shortest path outside the skin of the ship was up a nearby stairwell, or what we call a ladder. I placed my hand on the railing and heard, "Ladder well is blocked. Find another exit." I fumbled along the ship's passageway, not sure I was where I needed to be. Leading with my hands, grazing the strangely squishy walls covered with paint, whacking my shins on various metal boxes that held things like corks and patches to stop flooding. I got confused several times, but eventually made it to the ship's helicopter hangar bay, where I was thrilled to feel the chill of the outside air on my face. The blindfold was removed, my eyes squinting against the light, but still dry. I had passed the test.
Right.
As a qualified surface warfare officer, I had earned the right to wear the corresponding pin on my uniform. The moment came for the captain to pin on the shiny gold breast insignia, composed of a ship's bow, parting a wave, overlapped with crossing swords, the first to be awarded on USS Lassen. He sprung to affix it to my chest, as was tradition, only to hesitate and pin it somewhere closer to my collarbone, making the last second call that he probably should reach into my shirt to attach the backing like he would for a male officer. That day, I proudly wore my cattywampus golden pin, and I began to believe that one day I could be the captain awarding the surface warfare pins, even as a woman. It wasn't until 2006, while I was at a Navy school training to become a department head, that I met a female commanding officer of a destroyer, the equivalent to my captain on USS Lassen. I saw her from a distance in the student parking lot, tall, slim, blonde, with silver glinting off of her collar insignia, blinding me in the midday sun. "What, we don't salute senior officers in the Navy anymore?" she questioned as we were about to pass. I fumbled a response, quickly bringing my right hand up to salute. I had never seen a creature like her before, and assumed she was a fellow lieutenant. In fact, starting in 2002, women have taken command of guided missile destroyers and pinned on an insignia to newly qualified officers, as my captain did for me. In 2023, one of those destroyer captains became the first female Chief of Naval Operations, the top of our organization. My plan had been to end this story with me pinning surface warfare pins onto the next generation of junior officers. However, life and the S3 vertebra in my lower back had other plans.
Yeah.
While serving as executive officer of USS Sterett, I was supposed to take the title captain in just a few months. Instead, I was medically evacuated from the ship after losing the ability to lift my left foot. I was devastated and shocked, and felt like where I needed to be was on the ship. Thanks to a lot of physical and mental therapy, I've accepted the fact that while I was never able to make it to what was drilled into me as a career pinnacle, I know I've been able to positively contribute to our Navy and its sailors outside the ship's lifelines. As I prepare to retire, I can truthfully say I'm extremely proud of my 27 years of service and to be passing the baton to the next generation of women and men. I am also ready to take off the uniform and put away my gold warfare pin that I'm still proud of earning. There's a billboard displayed in what was Naval Training Center San Diego, now called Liberty Station, where I first started this wild ride and signed my Navy College scholarship as a high school senior that sent me unexpectedly to Pascagoula, Mississippi. In retrospect, just the right place. The billboard has a blue background and displays a vertical white wavy line that ends in an arrow pointing down and declares, "You are exactly where you need to be." I agree that it's true today and has been throughout my Navy career. Thank you.
All right, let's hear it for Jessica.
Yay.